UFC Vegas 55 is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. We're going to talk about some strategy, lineup construction, and we'll actually build some lineups later in the video, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. At this point, I feel like Big Papa in this game. These other channels lost you money last week. We made you money last week. It's starting to become a bit of a trend, isn't it? And we hope to carry that momentum into this week because despite us having 11 fights, I'm looking to fill my belly. And this might not look like the juiciest slate at first glance, but to me, this looks like a T-bone steak, cheese, eggs, and Welch's grape, and I'm ready to sink my teeth in. But first, if you haven't, go back and watch the predictions and breakdown video from earlier in the week. That's going to give you a good base of information. We also talk a lot about psychology when it comes to DFS in that video, and a lot of you have shared with me recently that you like that kind of stuff. So if you haven't got the chance to hear it, go back and watch the video from earlier in the week. It'll serve you very well. But this is the final picks video, so normally we address any changes that have come. Luckily, this card is held together, but make sure you watch the weigh-ins. We actually have fighters on this card that are moving weight classes, some that have struggled with weight in the past, so just keep your eye on that throughout the week. But let's hope that the MMA gods let us keep all 11 fights on this slate, so we have a nice competitive DFS day on Saturday. But since we don't have any changes this week, we could jump right into the value plays. I expect a lot of people to get here at 7,600 this week because it's Chase Hooper. And I know he catches a lot of flack publicly about not being physically strong, not being ready for this spot, but I do think that he has a real clear path to victory in this fight. Felipe Colares is giving up a ton of height and reach in this fight, which is important because Chase Hooper in his UFC losses has fought long guys for the division like Alex Caceres and Steven Peterson. One could even argue that Colares should still be fighting at bantamweight with his frame. So I think that Hooper's length is going to give Colares trouble because he may struggle to close distance, and in clinch situations against the fence, Hooper can snatch up a standing guillotine or jump the back like Charles do Bronx. On top of that, if his striking has improved at all since his last fight, which I'm assuming it has considering the year he's had between fights, then I think he's going to be better everywhere, and we'll see that on Saturday. And what I really like about him is that the kid is a finisher. The UFC loves him, and he's got the right people around him. He did a little bit of wrestling work with Ben Askren, striking work with Wonderboy, and I think these are the right kind of people to have around him because they're both specialists. Obviously, Ben Askren is a great wrestler. Wonderboy is one of the best strikers that we've ever seen in the UFC, and what they have in common is they're not physically the strongest guys, and Chase Hooper, at least right now, he's not that physically strong yet. He's still building himself up. He's still filling out that 6'1" frame. So I think it's cool that he's learning from guys who have had success without relying on brute strength, which is probably going to help him improve rapidly. And don't let the price tag fool you. Felipe Colares was one scorecard away from being 1-4 in the UFC, and he may have been cut by now. So I'll be chasing the dream this week. Good value here at 7,600. Next at 7,500, we can come down here to Dusko Todorovic. There's value here. And before you go, whoa, it's Dusko, he sucks, just hear me out. If he wins this fight, there is a ton of value built into his price. The striking technique, the speed, the power advantage, that all lies on the side of Chidi and Njokuani. We know that. But Chidi can be exposed on the ground, and Dusko does have solid top pressure when he is able to get his opponents down. Dusko is also probably going to have the better cardio in this matchup, and he's a finisher. He's got over a 90% finish rate as a pro. So if he wins this fight, it's going to be because of grappling, and it's likely going to be inside the distance, and we know that takedowns plus finishes equal high Draftkings scores. So that's where a big part of his value is coming from, but there's also another factor that's contributing to his value this week, and it's leverage. Recency bias is extremely strong in sports, and maybe it's strongest in MMA. Chidi and Njokuani is coming off a 16-second knockout in his UFC debut against the historically durable Marc-Andre Barriault. And so to most people, Chidi is middleweight Francis Ngannou right now, and Dusko Todorovic moves his head as much as Stephen Hawking. So they're looking for that knockout upside, of course, and that's why most of the field are going to be playing Chidi this week. And I've had people reach out on YouTube, I've had people on Twitter tell me that Dusko is going to get slept. They have no confidence in Dusko. Chidi is a lock. But like we've been talking about recently, this game is all about taking risks. And a lot of these people sound just like the people who were telling me not to play Andre Petroski last week, and that only made me want to play him more. And if you played Nick Maximov last week,
your mom's a hoe.
So big value here at 7,500 on Dusko Todorovic, just because if he wins, the score's probably going to be pretty high. Our next value play is Vince Morales sitting at 7,300 this week. This is another leverage spot. Listen, I'm not all that high on Vince Morales. I even picked Louis Smolka against him, and I wouldn't pick Louis Smolka over a cup of coffee. But the more that I look at this matchup and the DraftKings pricing, coupled with the public perception of how this fight is supposed to go, I see value here at 7,300. Jonathan Martinez has let people down in the past, let's be honest. He is slick on the feet, but he's not a great brawler by any means, and that's what Vince Morales does best. We're also in the smaller cage at the Apex. John Martinez likes to kick a lot, so if Vince Morales implements that crowd the kicker kind of game plan, I could see him having a lot of success in this fight and maybe stealing a decision win. And it's worth noting that the MMA gods are showing us a trend that we just cannot ignore when we look at Jonathan Martinez. They've carved out a nice little easy to follow pattern for us. Look at Jonathan Martinez since he came into the UFC. Loss, win-win, loss, win-win, loss, win-win. He's due a loss, and he's struggled with weight cuts in the past. So John Martinez is one of these guys in the UFC that has 2 fights every week. He's got the fight with the scales, and he's got the fight with his opponent. So that's always a little sus, especially for somebody up here at 8,900. And on top of that, Vince Morales is riding high on confidence following the best win of his UFC career. Now, he's not a lock by any means, but if you do end up targeting this fight, you might as well go the Vince Morales side, because again, I'll show you, just like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, Jonathan Martinez is scoring 60, 67, 59. Here's an outlier performance of 115. Then he's got down here, what is that, 68, 75. He's not scoring well in decision wins anyway. So if you want to target this fight, you might as well go the Vince Morales side. I don't expect a ton of people to get to Jonathan Martinez. I think him and Vince Morales will probably have similar ownership, but I think that of the underdog plays, Vince Morales isn't going to be high on everybody's priority list. So good way to get different right there with Vince Morales at 7,300, and a good way to save some salary. And then the last value play that I want to go over is right here at 7,200. Your boy Eryk Anders. Now, if the Eryk Anders that fought Darren Stewart here fights this weekend, he's going to win. And again, recency bias is a hell of a thing in MMA. He gets tapped quickly by Andre Muniz, but Andre Muniz is going to continue to submit UFC middleweights for years to come. There's not a lot of shame in that. Eryk Anders is training at a Fight Ready MMA, one of the hottest camps in the game right now, and Jung Young Park is really not all that dangerous. He's got good frontal chokes, but he isn't going to be able to get Anders down as easily as you might think. Eryk Anders has strong takedown defense, very strong hips as well. He's not an easy guy to get to the ground. Nor do I think that Jung Young Park will have the power advantage, and he relies on toughness a little bit more than he should. And we saw that when Iron Turtle fought RoboCop Rodriguez, which was one of the best fights of all time, by the way. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. Now, Park was having a lot of success at the time, but he tried to stand and bang for a little bit too long. He ends up getting rocked and ultimately finished by Greg Rodriguez. But his name's the Iron Turtle for a reason. He's a guy who could just take punishment, but a lot of the times when you have guys that rely on their chin, rely on their toughness, it abandons them when they least expect it. This could be a situation like that. Another sneaky thing worth mentioning here is that Eryk Anders is a southpaw, and Jung Young Park has not fought many southpaws recently, so that could cause some issues with adjustments during the fight. And on top of that, it's just so rare for us to get plus money on Eryk Anders like we talked about in the last video, so I want to take full advantage in some of my lineups. Decent value here no matter what he scores, because if he wins at this price, you're in a good spot. Now we can get into building some lineups. Before we build some lineups, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, because if you subscribe, it's good luck, and comment something for the algorithm, because you know how the algorithm works. And by the way, those of you that are commenting for the algorithm, it's really helped. I'm sure you've seen the number of views and number of subscribers grow pretty rapidly in the last couple of weeks. I couldn't thank you enough. This stuff means the world to me, so I really do appreciate that. But enough of that. Let's get into what our lineups look like this week. We're going to start with what our cash game lineup will likely look like. We've got a 5-round fight with Holm and Ketlen Vieira that I am assuming will go the distance, so it's a good opportunity for us to stack this one. So we're looking at Holm. We're going to come down here to Ketlen Vieira. We've got just over what our normal remaining salary would be if we started a fresh lineup. So we're in a good spot already. I do want to come up here and grab Jailton Almeida just for the finishing upside. I think Jailton Almeida inside round 1 is a good prop for us to attack. I think Almeida by knockout is probably the most likely outcome by way of ground and pound. We'll look at that prop at the end of the video when we're looking at some props and just going down the entire card. Now we've got 81.33 left per fighter, so we are going to have to come down here and grab somebody that's going to save us a little bit of salary. We're obviously not going to get Parker Porter if we have Almeida in this matchup, so it's looking like Eryk Anders, Vince Morales. I think that Amedovski gets finished by Joe Holmes at some point, probably within the first or second round, so I'm not really too excited to play him here. But we do want to punt one of these guys, even if they don't win but score a decent amount in a loss. We're still in a good spot. We've seen that for the last couple of weeks. So let's say we wanted to go with Vince Morales because we know that Jonathan Martinez probably isn't going to try to take him down all that much, so it's going to be a competitive fight. We might even have a split decision on our hands, and that could put us in a position to get a win all the way down here, and we know how useful these cheap wins are when we're building our cash game. So let's plug him in. Got 85.50 left over. If we want to grab Baby Shark Ricci, who we know is going to be shooting for a lot of takedowns, we know she's going to get some control time, and she probably finds a submission at some point. Polyana Viana is going to accept bottom, hoping that she could throw up an armbar, and Tabatha Ricci seems a little too sharp to get caught with something like that. So now we can come all the way up here to Joe Holmes if we wanted to spend all of our money. So we're looking at a situation where you're going to have at least one winner here from the main event since we're stacking. We've got the biggest favorite on the card in what looks like a complete mismatch in all aspects of the game here against Parker Porter. We have Vince Morales as our punt play, who is very live here because this is largely going to be a kickboxing match. He likes to get into brawls. We have the smaller cage, and we know how the judges are nowadays. It's probably a split decision even if he's getting his ass kicked, so we're in a good spot there. And then we finish it off with Joseph Holmes, who's going to have height advantage, reach advantage. He's super dangerous. He's likely going to win inside the distance. Amedovski hasn't fought in years, and we're looking at a situation where this guy is 0-2, probably falling to 0-3 in the UFC. He lost to John Phillips. Again, he lost to John Phillips. This is one way to attack your cash games. There's another combination I'll show you as well. If you weren't sold on Vince Morales and you wanted to go with this build, I call it the girl power lineup. We've got Holm, Ketlen, Vieira, Tabatha, Ricci, Elise Reed, and then you've got the big favorite again in Jailton Almeida, and then you've got Chase Hooper. Elise Reed probably going to win. This is going to be a striking affair from start to finish. I don't think that Sam Hughes is going to be able to get takedowns because Elise Reed isn't going to gas out the way Estela Nunes did. We saw how Sam Hughes was getting touched up in that first round by Nunes, and I think Elise Reed can do the same thing but for a prolonged period of time, so I like her in this matchup. I think this is a very safe way to approach it, and then you're looking at hopefully grappling upside, finishing upside out of Chase Hooper. This is another way to approach the cash games. But as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Kunith MMA. I'm going to be posting my official cash game lineup. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this, but I will continue to do it this week, probably at the next event as well. But we are 3 for 3 so far. We're going to keep this momentum going. It's not because we're geniuses, but lineup construction plays a big part in cash games, and it's really not hard to come up with the right line most of the time. On top of that, people sleep in cash games, and most of my cash games that I play, I'll find that there are a handful of people who just didn't make lineups, and maybe they don't care. They're like, oh, it's a $2 entry, $5 entry, and they just forget about it. It's not like a $100 single entry contest where you're checking every 5 minutes to see if your fight got canceled or not. So you're looking at a situation where you have people sleeping. You only have to beat less than half of the field if that's the case. Most of the people that are playing these contests have no idea what they're doing, and you're looking at a situation where you just build the lineups the right way, you'll probably get a good result. Now we're going to pivot to tournament lineups. So this is what you're going to see in your single entries. This is what you're going to see in your big contests. I will show you what I think is probably the chalkiest lineup of the week. I think you will see something similar to this in a lot of your contests, and this is by no means a bad lineup. There are some things that I don't like about it, and we'll get into that in just a second. But one thing that stands out to me is that there's no Holm here. Very few people are going to be playing Ketlen Vieira. Holm should win this fight, but being that it's women's MMA, I know a lot of people people get burned because they try to take the underdog and it just doesn't work out, and they don't know what to do with women's MMA. It just seems like you're rolling the dice every time. And when you're building out the lineups, you don't want to be stuck playing too many underdogs on a slate that looks like it's probably going to be pretty heavy with favorites. We have 11 fights. We'll probably see 3 underdogs win. I expect Uros Medic to be a pretty popular underdog because he has that knockout upside inside the first round, and I expect Chase Hooper to be a pretty popular underdog just because he's a popular guy as it is. People are going to be flocking to Chidi and Njokuani coming off that huge knockout in his debut, and Jailton Almeida is going to be a lock in most people's lineups for good reason. I think Michel Pereira and the Santiago Ponzinibbio fight are going to be massively over-owned, and I think most people will probably fall on the Pereira side. And Baby Shark Ricci is one of the best plays of the slate in my opinion, one of my more confident plays in the slate, and I think most of you probably feel the same. Now, if all these fighters win, then yeah, this is probably a pretty good lineup, but where do I think we've gone wrong here? I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is the Uros Medic fight as well as the Michel Pereira pick. So I'll start with Pereira because I'm sure a lot of you are building lineups throughout the week thinking, well, I'm definitely going to play Michel this week. Michel Pereira has fought in the UFC 7 times. In his first fight in the UFC, he was able to pick up a relatively quick knockout inside the first round. He scored just over 100 points. Very good showing for him that day. He absolutely fumbles the bag against Tristan Connolly. Same thing against Diego Sanchez here. But let's look at his last 4 fights. He is on a 4-fight winning streak, and he's looked great. Michel Pereira is a beast. 86, 62, 91, 80. He scores you 80 points at 9,100, you're fuming. But I mean, outside of his first fight in the UFC, he hasn't scored 100 points. He hasn't really come all that close either. And it's not like he's not throwing strikes. He's getting control time, he's getting takedowns, but he just doesn't score that well. Now, he may have success getting this fight to the ground, but Santiago Ponzinibbio is a vet. He's one of these guys that's on the commentary team. They always fight really smart. You're looking at a situation where he's not going to get held down. He's going to fight a smart game plan. And on the feet, I think that he's a better striker, at least with the boxing. And he's got power. So Michel Pereira does have things to worry about in this fight. This could look a lot like his fight against Chaos Williams, where he only scored 62 points in a win. Now, if he scores 80 points, you might think, well, at 8,200, that's pretty good. He's basically paid off the salary, and you can do a lot of other things with your lineup. That's not bad. But 80 points at 55% ownership, not good. And lately, he's been taking a much more patient approach. I mean, even if you look, he's got a 3rd round finish here, a submission against Imadaev, and he only scored 86 points. With his more patient approach, he's likely going the distance, and if he does win at high ownership, he's really not worth it. That's why I'm going to roll the dice and not play this fight this week, because I think that it can end up burning a lot of people who are hoping for violence and just don't get as much of it as they want. So let's take him out. Next is Uros Medic at 7,800. Uros Medic could totally come out here and pick up a quick knockout like he did against Alen Cruz. Great, he scored 122 points, that's awesome, but Omar Morales is historically very tough. He's the more experienced fighter. He's got the BJJ in his back pocket. He can get this fight to the ground if he wants. On the ground, Medic is a doctor out of water, or a fish out of water, whatever you want to call him, and he can burn a lot of people because he's going to be highly owned. He has to be. You have to play underdogs. It's not like you can't play underdogs when it comes to DraftKings MMA. You have to. That's the whole structure. And I know sometimes people get mad when they're like, oh, only 2 underdogs won, blah, blah, blah. Like, that happens, you know, so you have to call the right people. And I don't think Uros Medic is one of those right people. I think that he is outgunned everywhere except punching power in the first round. And Omar Morales, he's got the footwork, he's got the leg kicks, he can go to the wrestling, he can go to the grappling if he needs to. I'm looking at a situation where Omar Morales probably wins a decision here, and Uros Medic is really just nothing, a shell of himself after the first round. So let's take him out and start to work backward here. Well, you've got 8,000 left. In my opinion, you have to come down here and you have to take a chance. You could play Dusko if you want, but then you have Chidi and Njokuani. So what I would probably do in this situation is put Dusko in, take Chidi out, sub him for Joe Holmes, and then work my way back from there. Or if we kept the same kind of build, come down here to Eryk Anders at 7,200. Now you can still come up here to Ugly Man Joe, and now you're looking at a situation where you have knockout upside, potential knockout upside, grappling upside, knockout upside, grappling upside. This is a decent lineup. Still might be a bit chalky because you're not leaving any salary on the table, but this looks like a tighter priced week than say last week where there were closer matchups than what we're seeing here. I think again, only maybe 3 underdogs are going to win this week, so it's a little bit hard to call. But this is something that I think makes sense. If you wanted to get off of Chidi and you wanted to come down here to Dusko and see what else you can do, because now you have an extra $1,200 salary laying around, now you can swap out somebody like Chase Hooper. You've got $8,800. You can come up here. You wouldn't play Chidi in this lineup if you just brought in Dusko. You could play Colares if you're not sold on Chase Hooper since we just took him out. You can get Elise Reed, who's got a good matchup on her hands, or you can go with Omar Morales, hoping that he's able to pick up the finish after the first round. If you want to pivot here off of Joe Holmes, you want to come up to Holm, who's going to have 5 rounds to work. I think this makes sense as well. And if you want to get off of Omar Morales and you're looking for the better matchup with Elise Reed, you can do that. You're not sold on that, you can come back down here to Morales, you could take out Dusko, and now you're left with $7,600. You go back to Chase Hooper. This is probably not going to be a week where you're leaving a whole lot of salary on the table. You can get away with something like this. Now, let's say, for example, you didn't want to play Jailton Almeida, you didn't want to lay the chalk down like that, so you came up here to Joe Holmes, you want the knockout upside of Chidi, you're looking at Omar Morales, you're looking at Tabatha Ricci. I mean, you still have $7,900 to work, so you honestly could come down here and grab somebody like Vince Morales, for example, and you're still left with $8,500. You can play Elise Reed, or you can come down here to Michel and make something happen. This is going to be an easy way for you to get different because you're avoiding the main event. You're avoiding Jailton Almeida. You've already gotten different that way. That's something that you would put in a contest with, say, 30,000 or 10,000 other people. Big contest, this might pay off. And with 300, you could still do some other things. Like, for example, if you wanted to come off of Holmes, go back up to Holm, you're still getting different because you don't have Jailton Almeida. I will say that the Ricci, Holm, Pereira choices are pretty chalky. I think that Chidi and Njokuani is going to come in at decently high ownership as well. But I think that the Omar Morales and the Vince Morales, the Morales boys, I think the Morales squared connection there makes you different enough. So those are a few ways that you can use the picks to build your lineups. Play with lineups as much as you can before lock. See what makes you feel comfortable. See what makes you feel uncomfortable, because that might be the one that ends up hitting. And again, don't be afraid to take chances. And if you're following me on Twitter, you want to send me some lineups, do that. When you send me the lineups, if you could, tell me what contests you're in. Sometimes you guys send me the lineups and I don't know if it's for cash, I don't know if it's for tournaments, I don't know if it's single entry, I don't know if it's big field, I don't know if it's small field. So try to give me some background so I can tell you what I think, because without that context, it's difficult for me to give you some advice, if that makes sense. But we'll quickly wrap up by going over a few props that I think are worth attacking here. A lot of these ended up coming through for us recently, so I think I'll continue to do this for you, and then we're going to go down the whole card with the official picks. Okay, so first, as you guys know, I really like to attack round props. The 2.5 in the Sam Hughes Elise Reed fight, of course. You're also looking at the same kind of deal in the Tabatha Ricci Polyana Viana fight. I actually think that it's not bad to attack the under here at 2.5. Both of these ladies are finishers, so you're looking at a situation where this might be one of those rare cases where I lay down an under prop on a women's MMA fight. You can also come down here to the Holm fight and you're looking at over 4.5 rounds. I do think that this goes the distance, and I told you I would give you the updated data. I've had 34 women's MMA fights this year, still with only 8 finishes total, which means that this bet of the over in the women's MMA fights, including 5-round fights, is still hitting now at over 76%, which is crazy. You should be laying it down as often as possible, or taking the party that you like in these fights by decision. For example, the first fight of the night, you have Sam Hughes and Elise Reed. If you wanted to come down here to Elise Reed by decision, you're looking to double your money at plus 100. Not bad. If you wanted to go to the main event, Holm by decision is sitting at minus 120. It's minus money because it's probably going to hit for you. Chase Hooper and Felipe Colares, I actually like the under 2.5 in this spot at plus 135. I think that makes a lot of sense. Under 1.5 in the Jailton Almeida Parker Porter fight looks good to me. I like the Chidi and Dusko fight to go over a round and a half. Those 7 minutes rip off the clock, so that's a good spot. And I also like the over 2.5 in the co-main event at minus 185. I think that makes a lot of sense. If you come here to the Jailton Almeida props, you're looking at a situation, let's see, Jailton Almeida round 1 minus 120. You can also do Jailton Almeida knockout in the first round at plus 275. I think that makes a lot of sense. Eryk Anders by decision, we're looking at plus 330. And if you wanted to take the fight goes the distance, you're looking at minus 175. I think that's a good spot as well. Both these guys are pretty tough. Chase Hooper by submission is sitting at plus 500. I think that's a good spot for you to attack as well. And again, I said that I liked the under 2.5 rounds in the Tabatha Ricci Viana fight. We look at Tabatha Ricci by submission, it's at plus 350. Tabatha Ricci by knockout is plus 700. This could happen from the ground and pound. You could take both of these bets. Obviously, since it's at plus money, you can lay down the same amount. You'll make money either way, but I think Tabatha Ricci by submission is the most likely outcome here. And now I'll show you 11 legs like a spider sitting on a tripod. Take Elise Reed, Chase Hooper. I'm going to say for the sake of this, let's go with John Martinez, but don't be surprised if it goes the other way. Omar Morales, Ugly Man Joe, Jailton Almeida, Baby Shark Ricci, ya boy, Dusko. We've got Pereira, and we've got Holm. You're looking at plus 60,000 nearly. If you hit that, don't put it into cryptocurrency. Those are my final picks. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Again, if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I could bring more of this to you.